hope you're all doing wonderful today. Pastor George here, episode of A New Thing. I bet you guys think I'm going to talk about Egypt, but I'm not going to talk about Egypt, actually. I'm going to talk about this thing that popped up on my Facebook before I left for Egypt, and that means that I will show you guys. So, I was going through Reels or whatever, and a certain guy popped up, and I thought it would be really interesting to take a look at some of his content and react or respond to it. Some of which I've already seen, some of which I've just seen a little bit of clips of. But before we do that, I think it's important that we look first at this Bible passage, because this is going to be kind of my general thrust with this sort of thinking. So let me just pull that up for us. Hopefully, yep, you guys can see that. So this is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verses 31 through 33. So Jesus says, or Mark says about Jesus, Jesus then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." So I love this passage. I think it's great, and I think it's going to be very applicable to the thing that we are going to talk about today, or rather the response to the person that I'm going to be talking about today. Now, I'm not calling this person Satan in the sense of this guy is literally Satan, but it's this type of thinking that puts him in the same place as Peter is here. And the reason I can say that is what is happening in this passage. Well, of course, you're always going to find people who debate, but I think everyone could find agreement is what happens here is Jesus is telling his disciples and other people what is going to happen to him, that he's going to die and rise again, right? This is what he's talking about. And Peter takes him to the side and begins to rebuke him. Peter says that this is not supposed to happen, right? This basically what he's saying here is Peter is presenting Jesus with the idea that the Messiah is supposed to not do these sorts of things. And Jesus' response is to say that this is like, for Peter to be, is like Satan, right? He's saying the wrong thing about Jesus. He's teaching that Jesus is not supposed to do these sorts of things. And he tells Peter that he's concerns of humans versus concern of God, right? And basically saying that Peter's idea of the Messiah is a human concern, not what God actually is intending. And this is really important because the person we're going to be interacting with is this person, Reverend Dr. Caleb J. Lines. I hope it's Lines. That'd be kind of with not Wins or something like that. I've never heard him say his name, so I'm just assuming that that's how you say it. As you can see, he's very clear about what his still thing is. Progressive Christian leader. He's out of a church in, let me just confirm. He's out of a church in California, San Diego. Here you can see his description. It says Progressive Christian leader, senior minister of University Christian Church, DOC, UCC. So all I know is UCC is United Church of Christ. That's probably the most progressive mainline church, compared to like the Peace USA, which we're part of, and the RCA and the ELCA and things like that. So anyway, what his big thing is he's really big on like and he does it well. I mean, I'm gonna give him credit where credit's due, like interacting things online, right? Making a bunch of reels and things like that. I'm sure they're much more popular on TikTok than they are on Facebook, so these views are pretty low, but I imagine he gets probably more hits there. You can see they dress up for all sorts of things, so it looks like they had some Beetlejuice thing where he dressed up as Beetlejuice. He dressed up as Captain America when Comic-Con was in town. Things like that. But I wanted to react to certain videos of his, and I know the audio on my videos is wacky sometimes. I try to adjust the level, so hopefully you guys can hear it a little bit better. But we're going to look at some of these things. I mean, if you just go to this page, I mean, you can see this is very political stuff, and that's because that is how he views Jesus primarily, right, as this political figure. And this is the problem. right? This is the thing that's going on that I believe puts him in the same category as Peter. And you're going to see this kind of pop up. So this, I'm going to show you guys the video that I saw, and then there were a few things that I also saw here where I think it's important to take a look. Now, of course, a lot of these critiques I'm going to level are things that you could level at some people on the conservative side of the political spectrum in the United States who shape the gospel and try and use it in that direction. I mean, I think I've talked about that before with like the Trump stuff and things like that. But this is just what popped up. So because this popped up, Facebook thought I would like this, so they sent it to me. You know, that's the algorithm. I did not, but it does make good content. So I'm going to play this, and I'm going to stop and pause and go back and forth so you guys can see this. But, like, if you were to see this video, what would be your response? And the idea here is that hopefully, you know, you have reactions that lead you to think kind of correctly about these sorts of things. So I am going to play this video, and you guys can check it out. I'm just going to make sure that the audio is working first, and hopefully you guys can hear him somewhat clearly. So let me just...
I have to believe that Jesus is God to be a Christian, right? No, a lot of scholars think that Jesus did never teach that about himself. Instead, he talked about how to make the world a better place, and then his disciples, like, forgot all that and just talked about him.
So, Mike, just let's start with that, right? So the initial claim here is that Jesus never claimed to be God, right? He was just his whole thing was about making the world a better place. That's what it was. And his disciples forgot about that, which is, you know, I think the reason that I get so animated about this is because this is stuff that I used to believe, right? I made a whole video about this. I call it my deconstruction video, right? Where I used to be very much on the progressive side of the Christian argument in a lot of places. Not every place, but a lot of places. Certainly very influenced by German liberal theology of the 19th century, which is where all of this stems from. And so he just makes this claim. Scholars say this, right? Well, who are these scholars? What is their bias and teaching? And where do they get this information, right? For instance, do we have earlier sources that talk about Jesus just being this political type of leader that is then replaced later by this theology? No, right? We don't have that. So this is just conjecture based on your own leanings rather than just looking at the texts and the sources that we have, right? And, like, I mean, let's just look at that real quick, right? Like, what does it say here? It says, everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone who loves the Father loves his child as well. This is how we know that we love the children of God, by loving God and carrying out his commands. This is going to be important for something he says earlier or later. In fact, this is love for God, to keep his commands, and his commands are not burdensome, for everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. Who is it that overcomes the world? Only the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God, right? The Son of God. So there's this idea that Jesus is God. Jesus, you have to believe in him as the Son of God. And you're going to see him actually tackle this next, how he's going to spin this sort of thing. But the whole idea is that Jesus' disciples somehow forgot all of the core things that Jesus was about and instead replaced them, which I think is, I'll be honest, is a ridiculous claim on the surface. Like, I think that you have to be just kind of not really engaging with the material in an honest way to reach that point. Not saying that he's dishonest. I think, just like I was, there were parts of believing this that helped me and serve my own purposes in my life. And so I think that, like, you are going to gravitate towards the things that benefit you and keep you from having to maybe do things that you don't want to do. And it's easier to believe that the faith was corrupted and form a Jesus of your own view than it is to actually deal with the Jesus that we have in Scripture. So anyway, let's keep going.
Wait. Okay, then I have to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. No, that whole Son of God stuff was about loyalty to God instead of loyalty to the Roman Empire. whenever Jesus' followers said that he was the Son of God, they were saying that they were loyal to the God they knew through him instead of the Roman emperor.
So again, right, you have this idea that this is a political statement, that calling Jesus the Son of God is a political statement entirely, right? Not at all kind of a theological claim. Now, I think just what I showed you from John 5 is clear that this is also a theological claim. This is not just a political claim. I don't necessarily disagree that it is, in a way, a political claim about who Jesus is, but it's not primarily that. I think it's primarily a title that is given to Jesus describing who he is. Same thing with the Son of Man, right, that we see here. Like here in Mark, right? Like this is clearly a messianic title that is being used. But like, let's just, say for instance that it is a political title. So like, what is it that we're supposed to kind of aim to do? Well, like let's listen to him. This is what he says that the thing is about.
Wait, what? Then I have to believe that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity. Yeah, so the whole idea of the Trinity came along a lot later. In fact, the word Trinity isn't even in the Bible. Wait, then, like, what makes me...
So, just to comment on that really quickly, the word Trinity isn't even in the Bible, right? So, he's non-Trinitarian. I think he's denying the Trinity here. I think that's pretty clear. Maybe he's not, but I'm pretty sure, if you're going to not insist that the Trinity is important, and he has this other video about how you can throw out the creeds, I'm fairly certain he's non-Trinitarian, and that puts him outside of the faith, right? I mean, I think that's something that can unite pretty much every Christian. If you deny the Trinity, you're outside the faith. I mean, you might still claim the title of Christian, but per the Bible and per Christian history, you're outside of it. Just to point something out, which I think this is a terrible argument. He's not the only one who's ever done this before. But it sounds good on the surface. Oh, this word isn't in the Bible. Well, neither is the word like omnipotent or omnipresent or a lot of the things that we talk about God's character. Omniscient, right? The word omniscient never appears in the Bible. I mean, if we want to be really specific, none of the words I'm saying right now, and, but, or, yet, ever appear in the Bible because they're English words, right? And it was written in Greek and Hebrew. So let's not use bad arguments and say that unless a concept is literally mentioned in the Bible that was coined a lot later, then it's not biblical, right? Like, we have Jesus being referred to God. We have the Father being referred to God. We have the Spirit being referred to God. The Trinity was a way, it's a schema that Tertullian used to help make sense of that, and it's clear that it's a biblical teaching. So, like, let's not use these bad arguments of it's not literally mentioned in order to make a point. Like, that's low-hanging fruit. And honestly, as someone who has a seminary education, because he has a reverend, I assume that he's gone to seminary. He has a doctorate, right? Whether that's a PhD or a doctorate of ministry, he's studied this at a high level. This is not, even if you disagree with the Trinity, this is not a mistake that you should be making. It's pretty bad.
Me a Christian. Yeah, so what makes you a Christian is trying to follow Jesus' teachings. He told us that the best way we can serve God is by loving God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and by loving our neighbors as ourselves. When we do that, we're following Jesus' teachings and we're Christians. What?
Yeah, what is right, because that's true, but also hiding the 8 ball, right? So let's just look at like what Jesus says in the Gospel of John. Now, I know what he would say. What he would say to what I'm saying is that First John and John are late, so we can't trust them to talk about Jesus. I disagree with that. I think that these are much earlier than anything that claims that Jesus was primarily a political figure, because that comes from the modern age. So, like, let's just listen to them. Let's listen to these early sources about Jesus' life, shall we? So this is what he says. He says, when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? And Jesus answered, very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill, right? He had just done the miracle of the loaves. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Then they asked him, what must we do to do the works God requires? And so, what do you have to do? And Jesus answered, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. Right? That is what being a Christian is. You'll see this repeated over and over again, this idea that it's the greatest commandment, and that's all that matters, which we're going to look at. We're going to look at Matthew 22 just here in a second. But it's clear here that it's believing in Jesus and acting according to what he teaches you. So it's not just, oh, Jesus had some good teachings and following it, and that's what makes you a Christian. No, right? No, that's not what that Bible never says that. It's a limited reading of Matthew 22 or in other places where that passage is in Mark and Luke. But here, this is clear that early Christians related this to believing in Jesus. And I mean, you can just look at Paul. Now he's going to throw Paul out because he's going to say that Paul is not Jesus and they don't need to listen to him. But technically, historically speaking, we know the letters of Paul come previous to the Gospels. So if we're trying to get to the earliest teachings, right, if anyone's going to be there to claim that it's all about a political thing, it would be Paul, but you don't see that. Anyway, let's look at the greatest commandment. So I actually have this in the larger section because we can take it and move it out. But I think it's really important to realize that this is all part of one sort of thing. So hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert of the law, tested him with this question, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the laws and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Now, these point out that this is Jesus quoting the Old Testament, right? This isn't actually even original Jesus teaching. Jewish scholars who comment on the New Testament will point out that, a lot of people give Jesus credit for this, but this is already present in the Torah, and they're absolutely right. But notice what happens right after this. So the Pharisees test him, right? So this is the test for Jesus. And then Jesus tests them, and it's about the Messiah. So look at this. So it says, while the Pharisees were gathered together, this is still in this thing, right? So they ask him this question. Jesus then asks them this question. What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he? The son of David, they replied. He said to them, how is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? For he says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If then David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? No one could say a word in reply, and from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. Ooh. So what is Jesus claiming about himself here? What is he saying? Is he saying, I'm son of God like Caesar? Am I leading a rebellion? No, right? He says that the son of David, and Jesus is in a messianic sense fulfilling that role, but that's not who Jesus is primarily claiming to be, right? He's proclaiming to be the Son of God, right? That's who the Messiah is supposed to be. And you see this in the Old Testament, right? El Gabor, this is one of the titles, right? We read this every Christmas. Prince of Peace, all these other things, right? El Gabor, mighty God, right? Mighty God. So, it's supposed, this is something that is really important when we look at passages, and this is why it's so important to know your scripture, and to be aware of kind of how to read these things in context, because this is important. I'm not saying that what Reverend Dr. Lyons is saying that it's not important. This is important, right? We are supposed to love God with our heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, absolutely, right? I'm not saying that, oh, we don't have to do that. We do, but we don't reduce Jesus's teachings to just that, because he's pretty clear to move on and say, and what do you believe about me? Right? And that's important. We can't just pretend that it's not. So just want to look at some more of his stuff where you're going to see here. Now, you can like just look at all this, and you could just see that it's incredibly, incredibly political right here. Right, he's telling you to vote for Harrison Walz. I actually think that this. I don't know if this is illegal. I'm pretty sure that if you're supposed to be a nonprofit, you're not supposed to be like telling people who to vote for. But this happens in churches anyway, so I'm not going to particularly attack him. Just notice that this is a political faith, right? This is a political faith that he has. This is how he views Jesus here. I'm just going to find some of the other videos that I saw because it's important. If I can find them. I just need to... I didn't want to pull them all up because I don't want them running all the time. Oh, here we go. All right, so this is another good one. So this is from a podcast, I guess, he recorded. You're gonna hear a lot of similar stuff. I'm gonna play it through. I'm gonna let you listen to him. I'm not gonna have a ton to add that I haven't said already, but I just think it's important to kind of see what he's saying here.
The title Son of God and Son of Man were political titles in Jesus's day. So Son of God was the title of Caesar. If you look on ancient Roman coins, it says that Tiberius was the Son of God, right? And so whenever you say that Jesus is the Son of God, that's a political statement. What you're saying is that you are proclaiming loyalty to the reign of God, the kingdom of God, who you know through Jesus, rather than to Caesar and Rome. That's a political statement to say that Jesus is the Son of God. Same with Son of Man. I mean, you can make the argument that that's just human, but Son of Man was a title that was affiliated with the Messiah. And Jesus's followers seem to have confessed that he was the Messiah. But the Messiah wasn't just like a nice guy who was going to come and change the way we thought about things. The Messiah was supposed to be a warrior king who would overthrow the powers that be, in this case, the Roman Empire, and reestablish a united Davidic monarchy in Israel. That's what the Messiah was supposed to do. And so whenever and I think many of Jesus's followers probably thought he was going to do that.
They did, right? I mean, you see this pop up again and again. You see other people believe this. I mean, this is what I believe the tension is here in Mark 8, where Peter is basically saying, that's not what the Messiah is supposed to do. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, right? So
whenever they called him the Messiah, they thought that's what he was going to do. But they didn't realize that what Jesus was actually talking about was not a violent revolution, but a nonviolent revolution of the heart in which we shifted our loyalties away from earthly empire to the reign of God and allowed the reign of God to rule our hearts. So
I actually think that takeaway at the end is the correct one, right? Like, it is shifting ourselves away from the earthly kingdom towards the heavenly kingdom, right? Very Augustinian reading of this sort of thing. But, like, what does that heavenly kind of kingdom look like to Reverend Dr. Lyons? It looks like, you know, the Democratic Party platform. So not exactly the type of thing where I would say is helpful. So lastly is going to be this video.
Religion, especially the religion of Jesus, is inherently political. I think a lot of times people forget that the reason Jesus was crucified was for standing up against the empire.
Now, I hear this claim all the time. I see this all the time in our denomination. And he's going to talk about it. I've seen just a little bit more. I actually haven't seen the entirety of this video. But one of the things that they're going to say is that Jesus was crucified for being a political leader. Why? Because that was partially one of the reasons that people used the cross was for rebels. And so the only reason that Jesus was crucified is because he was a rebel, right? And because he was a political leader trying to stand up against the empire.
A lot of people really misunderstand that, but crucifixion was a Roman form of execution. And Jesus was crucified because he spoke the truth and love to the principalities and the powers, and he spoke out against the abuse of government and how everybody ought to have enough.
I mean, let's be real here. Where does Jesus ever say everybody has to have enough? And where does he speak out against the Roman Empire? I mean, I mean this in just like plain verse. Like, I know we can say that he does take, I do believe he does do these things through challenging a lot of authority, right? Like, maybe if you want to taking the title, the Son of God does that. Although, as you'll see, like, Jesus used a lot of Son of Man because he's the Messiah. He's making that. He definitely speaks out against Jewish authorities, right? The religious authorities, the leaders like that. But he actually doesn't really say too much about Rome at all. I'm not saying that the early Christians didn't attack Rome. I certainly think you see that a ton in Revelation, for example. But, like, where do you see Jesus say everyone has to have enough? You know, I don't think he's against that. I'm just saying, do we actually see that? I think it's important to say what is there and what isn't. What are we reading in, or what is our interpretation versus what's present in the text.
And about how his people were being oppressed. So, yeah, I think that if we really have those values, if we really believe in the values that everyone is a child of God with inherent worth and dignity.
This is one of the things that actually is pretty striking about the New Testament, is that when it uses child of God, it's only referring to Christians. We usually take that and we extrapolate it out to everyone. But if you actually look at the Bible, when it talks about child of God or children of God, it's referring to the Christian church, people who are adopted as his sons and daughters. Everyone is made in the image of God. That's something that we should affirm, and they do have inherent worth and dignity. Absolutely. But, like, I think the New Testament draws lines between some of these sorts of concepts.
Dignity. It's undeniable that people are being oppressed and that there needs to be some kind of systemic reform. Now, on the other hand, I don't think we let partisan politics influence our religious views, and I think that's a lot of what ends up happening in the United States. Instead, if we...
I mean, that has to be... This has to be a little ironic, right? I mean, like, he's saying we don't let partisan politics influence, and it's like half of his videos are like why you should vote for Harris and Walz. I mean, like, dude, come on.
If we truly value others, if we truly are trying to love others as ourselves, like Jesus taught us to, then that necessarily has political implications. Religion.
Yeah. So it's just like one of these things where, he's dressed up as a Ghostbuster there. It's just like, it's clear, dude. It's clear, like, all of your videos are about politics. This is actually the last one, and you can just see that he reads everything through this lens. So I want you guys to think about my series that I did on sexuality, because this is going to be something he says that's in great contrast to what my teaching is on sexuality. And I think that, like, I want you to see how he frames it. I want you to think if this is honestly what I was doing when I was preaching on this topic. So this is gonna be the last video. I forgot about this one, but I think it's important.
So today we're going to give up purity culture. Purity culture, because that is something that still very much exists in our society, and it's this idea purported primarily by fundamentalists that you can't have sex outside of marriage, and they define marriage very...
Again, I don't think I would categorize myself as a fundamentalist. I don't think fundamentalists would categorize me as a fundamentalist, I should say. But I agree with, like, this framing of what sex is, right? That sex is only for inside of marriage. Any sexual activity outside of marriage is verboten, right? That it's sinful. That's what I believe the Bible teaches. As you'll know, I also highlight singleness as being preferable to marriage. But that's neither here nor there. Just something else I think is worth mentioning.
Very tightly. They define who can and cannot be in that. And let's get one thing straight. It's not really about purity before God. It's really about politics and controlling people's bodies.
No, this is so. I want you to remember, like, go back and listen to my series on sexuality. I want you to look at that, and I want you to think: is this really what I cared about? Do you think it was about me trying to teach what I believe the Bible has to say about this and following God's commands, or do you think it was really about me giving you my politics and trying to control your body? I want you to honestly answer that question. Right? Because this is how he's viewing everything. He's viewing the faith through a political lens. So if someone disagrees with him, it has to be a political reason as to why that is, rather than maybe an exegetical or a theological reason, which is what highlights it. Now, don't get me wrong. Are there people that do this? Sure. But, like, let's not pretend that that's the inherent reason that people have this view, or that the Bible espouses this view, right? This is a very modern and political way of reading this.
That's what it's actually about. And it is an odd position to take because it's not biblical at all. So today we're going...
I don't know what he's going to go on to say after that. I can only imagine. But what I say to this type of theology is, get behind me, Satan, right? That this is a theology that is trying to take the gospel and reduce it to politics. And say, if you follow this set of politics, then you're a Christian. And if you follow this set of politics, then you are not a Christian. I think the easiest way to do this is just to hold up the theology of the Bible, see this type of thing, and go, that's not a Christian theology, that's bad. And also to look at the other side that wraps the flag in the American, wraps the cross in the American flag and says all sorts of stuff about how God has to act in a patriotic or nationalistic sort of way, and say that's not Christian either, right? These are false messiahs that we have been taking and been giving to ourselves here. So hopefully you guys have found this interesting. Hopefully this has equipped you to think a little bit more strongly and better about stuff when you see things like this pop up. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. I will see you on Sunday for worship. Peace out.